This video was made possible by Skillshare. Learn new skills and better yourself with a 1-month free trial by being one of the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description. On November 21st, 1984, Ana Maria Camacho gave birth to a baby boy. He had dark hair, was of average size, and, according to his mother, was a healthy and beautiful child. As far as births go, medically, it was an uneventful entry into the world. But that didn't make it an unremarkable birth. This was the arrival of Juan Pablo Camacho Martino, the first person both conceived and born on the continent of Antarctica. His parents, Germán and Ana Maria, were stationed on Presidente Eduardo Frei Montalva base with the Chilean Air Force. Germán was a surgeon and Ana Maria a nurse, and with Juan Pablo, they formed one of 6 families posted in Villa Las Estrellas, the base's residential zone, as part of the Chilean effort to colonize Antarctica, the only remaining continent in the world without permanent human settlement. Just 1 year after the birth of Juan Pablo, nicknamed the Penguin by Chilean media, Escuela F50 was established. Operating for the next 33 years, the school provided primary and secondary education to children living in Villa Las Estrellas. Escuela F50 signaled what separates Villa Las Estrellas from other Antarctic settlements. On a continent peppered with research stations, here, at a station tucked away in the southwest corner of King George Island, was a facility for kids, for families, for permanent residents. Unlike the thousands of researchers who have inhabited the continent for months-long stints, these Chilean families called Antarctica home for up to 2 years at a time, and over these long periods, their kids needed schooling. Across 3 decades, more than 300 students passed through the school's deteriorating doors. They went to class most days, departing from their modular-like homes, and sometimes trudging through intense snowstorms and sub-zero temperatures for lessons in language, music, and art. But in 2018, the school closed, along with a handful of other facilities. Civilian families were removed from Villa Las Estrellas, leaving military personnel and staff there alone, pausing and potentially ending 4 decades of sovereignty building at the bottom of the world.
Comenzó un proceso de sacar a las personas de Villa Las Estrellas. Era un asentamiento donde vivía familia y por ciertas condiciones de deterioro del asentamiento y también por algunos temas políticos del Tratado Antártico se empezó a sacar a las familias que vivían ahí, quedando más bien como una base para investigadores o para fuerzas armadas o de ese tipo, como bases militares. Entonces las personas ya no están, pero tampoco tenemos claridad de si van a volver familias a vivir a la Antártica, realmente. Entonces eso no está claro como política nacional. O sea, yo creo que de hecho me da la impresión que la idea es la inversa, es más bien que no vuelvan las familias.
Antarctica isn't owned by any country. As the only continent without an indigenous population, it has never been the permanent home for a self-sustaining society, let alone ruled over by a local government. On December 1st, 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed by 12 countries, 7 of which hold territorial claims, to ensure it stayed this way. These initial signatories agreed to 3 significant guidelines: that Antarctica was to be used for peaceful purposes only, essentially demilitarizing the area, that the freedom of scientific investigation and cooperation would continue, and that scientific observations and results from Antarctica would be made public and easily exchanged. There are now 54 countries that have signed onto the treaty, including the 7 original claim holders. Some of these claims overlap, as is the case with Chile, Argentina, and Britain. This is where King George Island, home to Villa Las Estrellas, comes into play. As the name would imply, it was the British that first discovered and laid claim to the island. Later, though, citing proximity and their belief that the Antarctic Peninsula is merely an extension of South America's Andes Mountains, Chile and Argentina also staked King George Island as part of their territory. One might think Chile's base, Presidente Eduardo Frei Montalva, is alone on this desolate island that sits 75 miles or 120 kilometers off the coast of Antarctica. But it is currently home to 10 research stations and 1 airstrip, Teniente R. Marsh Airport, operated by the Chilean Air Force. King George Island is a who's who of world players, as Chile's neighbors include Argentina, Brazil, China, South Korea, Peru, Poland, Russia, Uruguay, and the United States. In December and January, when it's warmer, much of the snow around Villa Las Estrellas melts, creating an Oreo cookie crumble landscape of black rock and patchy snow. The scattered red and orange buildings stick out on the shore. They're metal, sterile, and cold. A Russian Orthodox church overlooks the town, a constant reminder of the international neighbors that coexist in one of Earth's farthest corners. But amid this continental roundtable and isolation, how does one country assert sovereignty on an island that's not supposed to have it? That's the question both Chile and Argentina have been trying to answer with pregnant women. The baby race went back and forth, with kids living in Villa Las Estrellas and the Esperanza base, Argentina's civilian and military outpost that was established in 1953. The penguin, Juan Pablo, was the first person to be born and conceived in Antarctica, but it was Argentinian Emilio Marcos Palma Morella who was the first person to be simply born in Antarctica when he entered the world in 1978. His mother was airlifted to the Antarctic Peninsula tip when she was 7 months pregnant, specifically for this delivery. Not to be outdone, Chile's General Augusto Pinochet flew to Antarctica in 1984 to inaugurate Villa Las Estrellas as a civilian settlement. Besides establishing a school, officials developed a hospital, a gymnasium, and a post office, adding everyday life amenities to a place that wasn't so everyday. 6 months after Pinochet's visit, Juan Pablo Camacho Martino was born. Both countries participated in this baby race, hoping that having children on Antarctica would give them license to that land. While the competition to deliver children down south has slowed, 11 babies total of either Chilean or Argentinian nationality have been born on the barren continent.
Entonces, la gracia además que tiene Villa de las Estrellas es que es uno de los pocos asentamientos en la Antártica donde hubo familia. Y el otro que también lo tiene es Argentina. Entonces Argentina tiene otro asentamiento con familia que de hecho es primero que el de Chile. Y se desarrolla además en un periodo histórico en que Chile tiene problemas limítrofes con Argentina en la zona sur del continente. Entonces, el pelearse por el posicionamiento estratégico era súper importante y obviamente la Antártica metía en todo esto, aunque bien sabemos que es un territorio mancomunado, pero Argentina llega primero, arma un asentamiento, entonces luego Chile también pone un asentamiento con familias que duran este periodo.
But all of that hasn't changed much in the way of sovereignty. Their claimed territories each remain unrecognized internationally, and that probably won't be much of an issue until 2048 draws nearer. That's when the Antarctic Treaty is set for review, and when tensions over who gets to control the continent and its potential resources might increase. Part of the treaty says that countries cannot extract minerals. It's theorized that Antarctica, a massive piece of land roughly the size of Mexico and the United States combined, with ice as thick as 3 miles in some places, is also a resource haven. Below all this rock and ice potentially sits untapped oil reserves, with some reports estimating 36 billion barrels of oil and natural gas, enough to supply the global population at current rates for a year. There is also iron ore, coal, and chromium to be extracted. Some hint that diamonds may even lie beneath the surface. And then there's the commodity of sea life itself: krill, fish, whales, and more. So, depending on the world's consumption of these resources in 25 years, claiming some of the planet's last untapped deposits could be an economic and geopolitical motherlode. But accessing these resources remains as elusive as the materials themselves. Even if they are found, extracting and transporting them in an economically viable manner seems far off, since simply living there, as Villa Las Estrellas shows, is hard. The Antarctic Peninsula is only accessible by plane or boat, the latter being the more common form of transportation. To get here, cruise ships, research vessels, and private watercraft take off from either Punta Arenas, Chile, or Ushuaia, Argentina. From there, it's a 2-day journey through one of the planet's most notorious ocean crossings, the turbulent Drake Passage. By sea is the way most people arrive at King George Island, but air is increasingly an option. One of the charter airlines operating this route is Aerovías DAP, which first flew to Antarctica in 1989. It's not only researchers making their way to Via las Estrellas. Fly cruise operations, such as Antarctica 21, transport roughly 3,000 people to King George Island each year. Guests start their journey in Punta Arenas, a bustling port city at the southernmost tip of Chile, where they board a plane similar to any standard commercial experience. But the destination is much different.
And at the very, so you go over the Drake Passage, and at the very end of this flight, you get to see a little bit of Antarctica from the air, if you have a window seat. And then the plane lands on this gravel runway, and it brakes, quite strongly. So that stop is perhaps what's a little different compared to landing at any runway that we may be familiar with.
Planes land at Tiente Marsh Airport, which was set up to service Chile's base Frey with materials and personnel. Flying over the Drake Passage cuts the multi-day boat journey to 2 hours. Upon landing, guests are greeted with a humble airport that consists of 5 small buildings, including a hangar and control tower, and a small apron area for parking aircraft. From there, they walk about a mile from the plane to waiting Zodiac boats, and then board a 100-person cruise ship to explore the Antarctic Peninsula by water.
When the door of the plane opens and you exit the plane, you're in Antarctica and you're in an Antarctic environment. So you need to have, and we do a briefing, we prepare all of our guests so that you have your boots, you have your parka, you have your hat, you have your gloves, and the temperature you encounter varies, but it is somewhere around the freezing mark, just above the freezing mark typically, right? And then we walk from the runway down to the shore. It's about a 20-minute walk. And at the shore, we board Zodiacs, and from there, we go to the ship. So there is no infrastructure, no passenger terminal or transfers or anything of the sort.
The company is the oldest of 3 travel operators accessing the Great White Continent through Teniente Marsh Airport. Travelers' itineraries don't always include Via las Estrellas, but sometimes they do pass through the settlement to peek at the living quarters and amenities, which include 14 long, boxy homes, a souvenir shop, post office, and gymnasium. All of these buildings are either modular or shipping container-like structures, many of which were mostly assembled off-site and then transported on a boat to King George Island. Via las Estrellas is not set up to host hundreds of visitors. Its system simply cannot handle it, so tourists, if they get a chance, merely pass through, likely stopping in the post office for a stamp. What visitors can see, though, may be fleeting, as these structures are being reconsidered. The buildings have reached their life expectancy in the harsh climate, where the mean temperature year-round is 27.9 degrees Fahrenheit, or -2.3 Celsius, and basic infrastructure, like plumbing, has started to fail.
Entonces, esas 3 condiciones de extremo frío, extremo viento y radiación extrema implican ciertas condiciones para la arquitectura también. Entonces, un deterioro que erosivo y destructivo también por la radiación solar, porque además en la capa de ozono, justo en la zona extrema, la capa de ozono es menor, por lo tanto la radiación es mucho más fuerte y eso también incide con el descongelamiento.
This intense combination of weather patterns has degraded buildings that were installed decades ago. Torres and her colleagues will determine to what extent infrastructure has been damaged and how they can potentially replace it moving forward. But if civilians don't return to Via las Estrellas, Torres is still interested in capturing and recording the unique moment in time that existed.
Entonces es súper interesante porque es un fenómeno en que tú dices, tenemos personas viviendo y esas personas no han sido campo de estudio. O sea, antropológicamente y sociológicamente es un campo de estudio súper interesante que te permite estudiar cómo las personas se adaptan para vivir en un medio extremo.
Though Torres has not been to Antarctica, she is conducting interviews with past and current residents to gain information. At any given time, there are 80 to 120 people living in Via las Estrellas. One former resident is Macarena Marcodi Marua. The Chilean veterinarian was stationed in Via las Estrellas for a month in 2016 as part of her undergraduate research studying the effects of climate pollution in Antarctica.
fui a buscar 4 contaminantes de origen farmacológico que provocan malformaciones intrauterinas en animales. No encontré ninguno, pero con esas muestras, con ayuda de otros investigadores de Brasil, fueron procesadas en Brasil. Yo las mandé desde Villa Las Estrellas directo a Brasil, y buscamos otros contaminantes que resultó ser muy entretenido. Yo tomé 20 muestras de distintos lugares de la isla, de agua de mar, y encontramos en 18 de 20 muestras BPA. Encontramos también en 18 de 20 muestras ácido salicílico, que es bastante, en muchas muestras encontramos esos contaminantes.
The finding of molecular plastics in Antarctic samples is undoubtedly bad, but not unexpected news for the scientific research community and humanity in general. But the collaboration between countries demonstrated by Marua and her colleagues is a positive and demonstrative of the international camaraderie that happens somewhat exclusively here thanks to the Antarctic Treaty and general proximity.
En un territorio que se comparte con otros países, en que tú no tienes mi límite, en que yo estoy aquí y tú estás más allá, sino que dependen unos de otros. Entonces, la pista de aterrizaje que tiene Chile también se comparte con los asentamientos de otros países. Entonces, creo que ahí hay un fenómeno que es muy diferente a cómo se ha desarrollado la historia de la humanidad en los otros continentes. Entonces, que es limitado por países peleando unos con otros, y este tiene un fenómeno totalmente distinto.
Es un lugar muy cosmopolita. De hecho, yo me fui allá por una beca de estudios para poder hacer mi tesis, y en esa beca yo tenía que trabajar en la base de Correos de Chile. Correos de Chile es el único lugar de donde se puede mandar correo físico en toda esa región de la Antártica, no solo en la isla. Entonces llegaban a correos los coreanos, los chinos, los uruguayos, los rusos, los chilenos, todos llegaban ahí. Así que la verdad es que tuve que interactuar con todo el mundo, fue muy, muy, muy entretenido.
As Macarena points out, the relationships aren't limited to research. Because most of the bases are situated near one another on the island's southwestern tip, it's common to see carousing between countries.
Muchas reuniones sociales formales y muchas reuniones sociales informales. Sí, la base naval, los marinos tienen su bar, que es muy entretenido. Muchas fiestas allá. La Fuerza Aérea me parece que también es más bien un casino, un poco más formal. Tenían su espacio, un quincho le llaman ellos, para festejar. Y era muy gracioso porque allá es en verano sobre todo, bueno, en verano, en invierno es de noche, pero en verano son 24 horas de luz, no hay noche, no night. Entonces las ventanas ellos las debían cubrir con papeles, con bolsas de plástico para que no entre luz y poder tratar de tener una fiesta común y corriente.
Even Juan Pablo Camacho Martino, the penguin, was an early indicator of this international cooperation. His birth brought joy to the bases nearby, and his mother reported that the Russians would rock him to sleep and the Poles gifted pickles to celebrate his birth. But don't be fooled by the seemingly ebullient nature of the settlement. Life in Villa Las Estrellas is difficult, trying, and exhausting. And given the low numbers of residents, everyone holds multiple jobs. Macarena, for example, was there for research, but she also served in the post office, keeping her both busy and always on the move.
Entonces, si yo quería ir desde la base aérea donde yo dormía hasta el laboratorio del INACH donde yo tenía que trabajar, eran más o menos 300 o 400 metros de distancia nada más, pero en esos 300 o 400 metros de distancia yo tenía que avisar a la hora exacta en que salía y a la hora exacta en que llegaba. O sea, ningún paso sin que nadie supiera dónde estabas. Eso como en lo cotidiano.
Not only are the conditions physically challenging, but living so isolated can be detrimental to people's mental health, too. Torres's team dubbed the idea of being stuck on an expanse void of variety and color as, quote, white confinement. What the rest of the world felt during quarantines as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, residents in Villa Las Estrellas had already confronted.
pero estas comunidades que vivieron en la Antártica ya tenían una experiencia previa de confinamiento, que es lo que nosotros nominamos como confinamiento blanco. Entonces, que no es solamente un aislamiento de no poder salir a interactuar con el otro, sino que estar fuera del sistema y sin conexión a internet, por supuesto, porque las condiciones en esa época no eran las que tienen ahora. Incluso ahora la conexión a internet no es buena, pero aislados totalmente.
Isolation will remain the defining element of this settlement, this island, and this continent for now. Juan Pablo Camacho Martino's birth will stand out in history for marking the beginning of Chilean occupation of Antarctica. But Chilean officials aren't sure if the experiment to settle the Great White Continent was, and is, a successful one. Villa Las Estrellas is at a turning point. For now, the Chilean Air Force will continue to occupy Base Frey. The Tiente Marsh Airport will function, researchers will study the ecosystem, and tourists will visit. But the questions surrounding if civilians will return remain unanswered.
Pero sabemos que viene un cambio climático que va a ser importante en unos años más y tampoco tenemos claridad de cómo va a ir evolucionando la Antártica. O sea, vemos que los deshielos van aumentando cada vez más, ¿cierto? Entonces, las temperaturas son menos extremas que lo que en algunos periodos que los que han sido históricamente. Entonces, yo creo que ahí hay una visión también de futuro que está así un poco también controlada por los tratados antárticos.
What Villa Las Estrellas teaches us is that people can live in Antarctica, but it appears for now that permanent presence is rather unsustainable. This hamlet under the stars could be a precursor to human settlements at the end of the globe. Or it could simply serve as a historical footnote, a brief, starry-eyed attempt to permanently settle a landscape naturally and legally predisposed to temporary visitation and short-lived excursions into the Antarctic's extremes. Probably my favorite visuals of extremities are the illustrations we use throughout each video. I think they're each so striking, and I know our illustrator, Maddy, uses all digital tools, so it got me wondering how I could learn to make similar ones myself. Luckily, I already knew the answer: Skillshare. I started with iPad illustration, line drawing essentials for fun, flexible art, which serves as a great introduction to the skill using a device that many of us already have. Of course, digital illustration is just one skill, but no matter what you want to learn, Skillshare is the place for it. Graphic design, creative writing, animation, music production, entrepreneurship, productivity. If you want to better yourself by learning a new skill, they almost certainly have a class on it, taught by the actual practitioners of that skill. Best of all, you can join this online learning community with absolutely no commitment by being one of the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description and sign up for a free trial. The worst thing that can happen is that you'll have bettered yourself with new skills, and heading there helps support extremities, so join with a free trial at the link in the description now.